Yes, so I've spoken about the SAMESG Guideline before, but just to give sort of those who haven't heard about it an update on where we are and what the guideline's all about. So this figure, those who are in the mining industry and who are involved with reporting on rocks in the ground, this figure is well understood, and it comes from the CRISCO codes and all the various codes and standards that Sarah mentioned just now, apply the same figure. And what it tells you is that as we increase the confidence in understanding the geology that's in the ground, so we can classify the various rocks into different categories, and that gives potential investors and the owners of the mineral resource confidence in how much rock they can potentially mine. Now, there's two important factors or concepts within the mineral reporting world, and these are what's called RPEEE, which is a concept that tells you how much, well, is the rock in the ground potentially viable? Could you extract it and could you sell it? And in determining that, a whole lot of assumptions need to be made, which the people who are doing the reporting need to declare in their reports, and environmental, social, and governance come within that umbrella. And the other concept is modifying factors. So if you are trying to determine whether the resource in the ground could be economically mineable, then you apply various modifying factors to it. Sarah was talking through some of those now. You know, do we know how to mine it? Do we know how to process it? Can we sell it? And what are the ESG considerations around it? And these concepts get applied at specific points in the reporting process. Now, I have taken poetic license and modified the figure one that you saw just now to sort of illustrate, particularly in the exploration phase, there are distinct phases within that process, which can and do have particular impacts, because as you undertake invasive work, then you start having boots on the ground, and you can potentially create environmental and social impacts. But once you've gone through that exploration process, that's when you need to apply this RPEEE concept. And it's very important at that stage that all of the assumptions that could influence the eventual economic extraction are clearly described. Again, once you in the mineral resources phase and you're trying to firm that up to declaring mineral reserves, you apply the modifying factors, and depending on the confidence that you have in those modifying factors, you either end up with approved or probable mineral reserve. Now, this process is really well understood, and if we take this as an example of a mining life cycle, on the left we sort of start with the pre-exploration phase. We should probably have some houses and some people there for it to be even more technically correct. But you move from left to right over the mining life cycle, from doing your exploration, constructing, operating the mine, doing some processing, creating waste, rehabilitating, and ending up, in theory, with some kind of a positive legacy at the end of the day. So overlaying that with the mineral reporting phases, a lot of that work is done and needs to be done before you can even start your construction process. And then during the life of mine, typically most mines will look for resources that are nearby to where they're located. So there'll be some kind of ongoing exploration process and increasing, hopefully, the mineral resources and the mineral reserves. But all of this geological process takes place in a certain context, which presents both risks and opportunities. So if we just think of some of the environmental risks that come up during the process, in green here, these are some of the things that need to be considered, whether it's your carbon footprint, what are the ecosystem services in the area, what's happening in terms of water and sensitive habitats. If we look from a social perspective, how could the mine contribute to community investment? Can it create jobs? What happens if people move into the area? And from a governance perspective, we're looking at things like, what are the skill sets of the board and the people who are going to be working on the mine? Are we paying tax in the right place at the right time? Are we paying people the right money? Have we got the right permits in place? And so this context becomes very important and overlays and should be influencing the resource and reserve determinations. So if we try and distill that down into something that looks a little bit more organized, in the planning phases, you need to put a lot of effort into understanding what your activities are going to, what activities you want to do and need to do, and what the impacts are likely to be. Because over time, you shift from that planning process into the doing process, and that's when you can create the impact. And so what SAMESG is asking of the mining industry is to understand and recognize all of these potential planning requirements, the activities and the impacts, and to distill that into the mineral reporting, so that we say, well, we understand all of this, but actually what does that mean? So where does the guideline sit? SAM codes, as Sarah explained earlier, is one of many international codes and standards which sits underneath the CRISCO family of codes on mineral reporting. And SAM codes has three main codes underneath it. SAMREC, which is the mineral reporting code. SAMVAL relates to valuation of mineral resources, and SAMAG is the oil and gas code. And SAMESG sits, which is the Environmental, Social and Governance Guideline, is there to support SAMREC and SAMVAL. And we're still working on integrating into SAMAG. The processes in oil and gas are obviously quite different for reporting on resources compared to SAMREC and SAMVAL. And so that's a continuous work in progress. So the guideline really talks to helping the mining industry understand factors which can influence the RPEEE and the economic mineability of the resource. It was launched in 2016 and comprises of 9 components at the moment, which talk to material, environmental and social modifying factors. We're busy working on version 2, and so hopefully by the time we have next year's conference, we can give you some more insight into what version 2 looks like, because we've realized that being a guideline, it has a lot of technical substance, but doesn't necessarily give enough guidance on the integration and the distillation that we want to see from mining companies. So our approach in the second version is really going to be saying, well, for each of these mineral reporting phases, what should the ESG focus be? Within each of those, what are the things that we should be looking at that's most pertinent to that particular phase, and with due cognizance of the work that will come later, and what does it actually mean for the project? So we draw on a lot of the sustainability frameworks that exist. We heard a bit earlier on from Geraldine about some of these frameworks. And so we're trying to say that, well, we recognize that there's a lot of work going on internationally. Some of these frameworks came out since the SAMESG was first published. We know that there's a lot of work to try and align the various frameworks and to integrate it formally into, or have a similar IFRS kind of international standard. And so we're trying to draw on all of these into the next version of SAMESG, whilst making it practical for the end users to say, okay, but what does this mean for my project? You know, oh, there's a sensitive species that lives 3 kilometers away. What does that mean for us as a project, and what does that mean for the mineral resources and mineral reserves that we're trying to declare? So yeah, happy to take any questions. Just a short and sweet overview of this particular guideline. And as Sarah says, all the various codes and standards are doing their best at the moment to integrate ESG in a way that makes sense to them into their various codes and standards. And it's a very exciting space to be in, to see how everyone is trying to make this more practical and a more obvious requirement for each of these mineral reporting codes, because it's not only about, you know, how much rock is in the ground, it's about everything that goes around it and that determines whether or not you have a resource or a reserve. So happy to take any questions.
Excellent, Teresa. Thank you so much. We have a question coming in here asking if the approach is comparable with the UNFC, which is the United Nations Framework classification for resources.
Yes, so it is, and the focus is slightly different. So the UNFC is really focusing at a country level. and that's where it's most applied. Mining companies will follow the CRISCO template, but UNFC looks at a nation's inventory of mineral resources, and their recent sessions, there was a lot of discussion around how to integrate sustainability into that classification, and they've got quite a developed framework that talks to considering environmental, particularly considerations into that classification. But the focus is slightly different in that UNFC is at a national level compared to a specific company asset.
So one question I had is, what is the business case for mining companies to look at ESG this early on, already at the exploration phase?
There's many answers to that question, but I'll take one that's aligned with the purpose of the SAM codes and CRISCO in particular. Is these codes exist because we want to, mining companies want to attract investment, right? So that's why the codes are there, so that there's some kind of uniformity across the industry. So if company A says, oh, my mineral resource is X or my mineral reserve is Y, then there's some kind of commonality across and meaning behind those definitions, so that investors have confidence to put their money in. Investors, we know, want to understand what the ESG risks are related to a particular mining company. And so the business case for, first of all, complying with the CRISCO codes, complying with SAM codes, complying with the SAMESG Guideline, is that you're meeting what your investors are asking you for. Yes, they can go and try and troll your website and see if they can find anything. We're trying to make the reporting more blatant, more transparent, because investors have a particular need and information that they're looking for, because they're under pressure from the people who are giving them money to make sure that their money is responsibly invested. So particularly within the mineral reporting phase, that's the business case. Is if you want money from your investors, you need to tell them what you're doing in the ESG space.
And do you feel that the companies have the skills to implement this?
Some better than others. I think it's an evolving space, particularly in the South African context. Our chair of the overarching SAM Code Standards Committee is very good at reminding all of us that the work that we need to do needs to be applicable to the junior miner. Because the guys with the big bucks, the multinational mining companies, they've got the money to pay for the resources to bring in a heap of consultants to do their reporting and stuff for them. But the junior guys don't always have those skills. And that's why, particularly within SAMESG, we're really trying to make it include a lot more guidance, so that if you are a geologist working for a junior mining company and it's really only you who has to do all of this, sorry, there's a motorbike driving past, that you have some guidance on where to find information to prepare these reports to attract your investors.
And we have one question here, that is, which is the best code to follow? South African, Canadian, Australian, European, etc. I mean, you're maybe a little bit biased, but go ahead.
No, well, put it this way, all the codes need to align with CRISCO. And CRISCO has a standard set of definitions, and fundamentally each of the codes requires similar things. Every time one of the codes does an update, for example, PERC's been updating their standard at the moment, one of the requirements of being a CRISCO affiliated standard is you need to ask all the other codes to provide input. So fundamentally, I think they're all the same. Certainly within SAM codes, we're aware of some of the improvements that we're trying to make. We're really trying to get ESG more explicitly integrated into SAMREC, into the table 1 of SAMREC. So I think fundamentally everybody's trying to achieve the same thing. Depending on different jurisdictions, you find a code that you can work with and that you're more familiar with. Obviously, in South Africa, we're very proud of the fact that we're the first country to have a formal ESG guideline. We've won a UN ISAR award for our guidelines, so we are very proud of that fact. But the other codes are also doing their share to bring everyone in alignment. I think something as important as ESG is something that the codes hopefully in time will become more aligned on as they have in term, for definitions, for example, and the table 1. So I think we're all moving in the same direction.
Fantastic. That was excellent. So much interesting information. And there are much more resources on that. You can check out the website for that. So a round of applause.
Thanks, everyone.